Production support for InFocus is provided by Hoosiers for Higher Education, a statewide organization of alumni and friends of Indiana University, dedicated to raising the awareness of the importance of higher education for Indiana citizens and the state's future. More information at 800-937-3448. And Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for Central and Southern Indiana cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Roll call shows 62 members present. For the fourth week, we fail to have a quorum.
After the Indiana House Democrats' 5-week absence in Urbana, Illinois, and with 1 day left in this legislative session, budget issues continue to dominate discussion at the State House. State revenue is increasing and more money is being funneled to education, but worries remain that the cash may never materialize. Wounds from earlier in the session, especially those felt by members of labor unions, are still fresh in the minds of those who protested for collective bargaining rights and those who left the state in protest. We'll talk about what Hoosiers can expect from the final hours of the 2011 session as we put the state legislature in focus. Thanks for joining us for this edition of In Focus. I'm Stan Jastrzebski. If you have questions for one of our studio experts during tonight's program, please email them to us at infocus@indiana.edu or call us at 1-800-987-9848. This month's show will be a little different than previous editions of In Focus. That's because throughout tonight's program we will air short segments about issues dominating discussion in Indianapolis. After each segment we'll get comments from members of our panel. And joining us tonight are Terry Spradlin. He's the director of Indiana University's Center for Evaluation and Education Policy, along with IUPUI political scientist Brian Vargas and Joseph Varga, an assistant professor of labor studies at IU. More with these gentlemen in just a few moments. We will start tonight's program, though, with an examination of labor issues which raised the volume of debate at the State House in a couple different ways. WTIU's Dan Goldblatt explains how protesters got loud and got lawmakers to talk.
We're just not pleased. We've lost a lot of people. We work through GE here in Bloomington, and we've lost so many jobs. They've just been shipped away.
That was union electrician Becky Gaddis. She and other union laborers have been at the State House frequently in the past months, demonstrating for union rights. Labor issues have stirred a lot of emotions recently and created a lot of confusion among many Hoosiers. What is a project labor agreement? How are unions involved in PLAs? What does right to work mean, and how could it affect the Indiana economy? PLAs, or project labor agreements, are essentially no-bid contracts on public, taxpayer-funded projects where the private contractors agree to meet certain deadlines, avoid labor shortages, ensure a project, such as a road, bridge, or sewer line, is completed as quickly and efficiently as possible. The Indiana Chamber of Commerce has come out against union-only PLAs. President Kevin Brinegar says he's not opposed to all of them.
I want to be very clear. The Indiana Chamber of Commerce is not opposed to project labor agreements. What we're opposed to is what we've seen in recent years in various public construction projects in Indiana, which is union-only project labor agreements.
Brinegar says these union-only contracts have allowed out-of-state workers to come in and work on Hoosier projects, even though non-union Indiana workers were available to complete them. But not everyone feels union-only PLAs will hurt the Indiana economy. Bloomington Representative Matt Pierce says union projects keep wages up.
A project labor agreement allows you to sit down with the skilled craftsmen, the people working on the project, put together the parameters of how you're going to do the project, and put some requirements in there that the local community likes.
Another hot labor issue this session is right to work. Though Republicans say it's off the table, it will likely be back for a vote next year. According to Brinegar, right to work will help the Indiana economy.
It'll mean faster job growth, lower unemployment, and faster income growth. And we all ought to be supportive of that, and in fact our polling shows that Hoosiers overwhelmingly are supporting. The opposition to right to work really comes from the union bosses, who collect more dues from people who don't want to be paying them under the current collective bargaining agreements than they will if right to work passes.
A right to work bill would not mean unions would be banned in the state. Instead, closed shops, which are places where union membership is a requirement of employment, would no longer be allowed, and the individual worker could choose whether he or she wanted to be a union member. Pierce, though, sees the right-to-work bill and the bill eliminating PLAs as an attack on labor groups.
Well, there's actually a whole slate of proposals from the Republicans on the table that would impact workers across the board, whether they're public employee workers, teachers, or people working in the private sector. Some proposals would make it very difficult for people to come together and work together for their common interests, to try to move their wages up, to try to have better working conditions.
As the general session comes to an end, many of these labor issues will be back next year to be debated and voted on.
Joe, let's start with you and let's talk a little bit about right to work that you just heard Dan trying to describe a little bit. The right to work bill, as you heard him say, was essentially killed by the Democrats leaving for Illinois. The Republicans said they would not bring the bill back. Good thing, bad thing? What do you think?
Well, I think that the Democrats who left the state, when politics works best, representative politics works best, they were representing their constituents. And I think that one way of viewing this is it's basically an attack on that connection between labor unions and the Democratic Party. And it's happening not just in Indiana, but it's happening in Wisconsin and Ohio and Michigan. So I think for their constituents, the people that support them, the Democrats leaving the state was what they literally had to do because these laws were going to be rammed through. On right to work, what I'd like to say first is that the depiction of it at the beginning of the show says that Indiana has closed shops. Indiana doesn't have closed shops. Closed shops are in fact illegal. That means a closed shop is where every employee has to belong to a labor union, has to pay the dues. Indiana doesn't have closed shops. Indiana has agency shops, meaning that if you work for an employer and the union has negotiated a contract with that employer saying that everybody has to be represented in the collective bargaining unit doing that particular job, you have to pay the union dues because you're getting representation from that union. But you don't have to belong to it. So it's an agency shop we're talking about here. And it's a crucial distinction. So these are basically open shops, agency shops, and right to work further kind of tries to dilute that union power within the workplace by saying that what the Indiana right to work rule says is that the proposed law that's now been dropped says that it would make it a misdemeanor crime for an employer to collect union dues from every employee within a bargaining unit. So in other words, it's the way I try to talk about it and try to make sense for people with it. It would be like moving to a town like Bloomington. You take advantage of the good roads that we have here, you take advantage of the culture that we have here in Bloomington and the schools, and then say at a certain point, well, I don't like the environmental policy of the city council, I'm not going to pay my local taxes. And yet you still get all of those advantages. That's what right to work laws do for workers in an agency shop. They allow them to opt out because they don't like unions philosophically or ideologically. And then that causes other union workers or other people who are paying dues to say, well, if Joe's not paying dues, I'm not going to pay them either. And it erodes the power of the labor union.
Brian, let's talk about this from a political standpoint. What does it do for the Republicans who proposed the right to work legislation, which got shot down, and the Democrats who, at least symbolically, seem to be the ones who got it shot down?
Well, you know, whenever you look at these kinds of things, you have to realize there's a reason the Democrats left the state. When you're destined to lose, you know you're going to lose, you're going to act that way. They left because they knew it was going to be rammed through them. They had no way to win. They're outvoted in both chambers. They have a strong constituency represented in labor unions, also in particularly public employee unions, for which there are things actually in the budget bill which take away their right to collective bargain. And so there's a number of things that basically laid out a good fight for the next legislative session. And again, we have to remember that's a short session. They're supposed to fix things that are in the budget. They generally go beyond that. Indiana legislators are kind of hard to herd around, but the lines are clearly drawn, and it will be brought up, and it will be brought up and brought up because given the redistricting maps, which is another whole issue of this session, the Republicans are likely to be in control for a good time, barring something exceptional.
You brought up the idea of collective bargaining, and I want to get to that in just a minute when we talk to Terry about education.